All right, this is Notes 1.1. We're going to look at characteristics of life and design. So you can get out your note packet or your quarantine packet that you have, and you can pull this sheet out for Notes 1.1. If you are quarantining outside of the dorm and you do not have a quarantine packet that I made for you, then you can go on Google Classroom and you should be able to see this file there. You should be able to print this out. And if not, then you can use a digital version and fill this in using some sort of app that can let you draw on PDFs or Google Notes or something like that. Okay, so this is basically you looked at an activity Explore Activity 1.1, where you had several different objects and you had to brainstorm whether or not they were alive. So, for instance, like a snowflake, or a crystal, or a jellyfish, coral, things like that. So what makes those things alive? What makes those things not alive? Basically, if you were to go to Mars and you were to find something, how would you know if you could say, I discovered life on Mars? Like, how do we know what life is? How do we define life? Okay, so there's several different characteristics that describe all living things, and so we're going to name what those are. So an organism is an important word that we need to know, and we're going to define here. So basically, just an organism means any individual living thing. So an individual living thing, and you can fill this out as you go along in your notes. Living thing. So, for instance, a plant is an organism made of multiple cells. You would just say an organism. So anything, and it covers animals, plants, bacteria, mushrooms, fungi, anything that's living, you can say it's an organism. And the reason we call it an organism is this actually comes from the word organize. Organism. Basically, living things are very organized. When you start diving into their anatomy and their biology and you start looking at how all the structures fit together, you see the amount of organization that is inside these living things. And so we call these things organisms. All right, so there's several different characteristics of life that you need to know. There's about 8 things that all living things follow and all living things have in common. And so in order for something to be considered life, we would need that to meet all 8 of these criteria. Some things are not alive and they have some of these characteristics, but they don't have all of them. So we've got to be careful that when we call something alive, we make sure that it meets all of these criteria. Okay, so the first thing is that living things are all made up of one or more cells. One or more cells. Okay, so sometimes you have something that is just one cell, sometimes you have multiple cells, but basically a cell is what is the smallest unit of organization to be considered alive. So this is a cell, okay? Super tiny. You can see it through the microscope. It has a lot of different organizational structures on the inside, but basically this is a one-celled organism living right here. Okay, even just one single cell meets all the other requirements of life. Okay, so all 8 requirements a cell meets. So that means even the cells that make you up are considered to be alive. They're not separate organisms, but they are living parts that make you up. Okay, something important about cells, we'll learn more about these in Unit 3, but every cell has a membrane. Okay, you can kind of think of a membrane like the sort of soapy bubble that surrounds like a bubble, or like the edge of a balloon. Okay, it's this. Here, let's change to green here. It's this green part right here on the cell. Okay, and that separates it from its surroundings. So here on the inside, you have the inside of the cell, and then on the outside of the cell, you have water or whatever sort of mixture it's in. So the cell membrane is covering the cell, and every single cell has one of these. And as we've talked about, there are certain organisms that are made up of just one cell, such as this one, okay? What is that called? Those are called unicellular organisms. Unicellular, okay? Una means one, okay? So we can specify that. Here, let's make our colors the same here. So una basically means one. So one cell, kind of like unite. You unite as one people, okay? Multicellular is the word we use to describe organisms that are made up of many cells. So for instance, this is part of a plant, and it has a lot of different cells coming together, building on top of each other. You are multicellular. You're a human being. You've got a lot of different cells, so you're multicellular. So things like bacteria, those would be unicellular. Things like plants, animals, fungi, those are more multicellular. Okay, so all living things are made of cells. So if we discover something on Mars and it's made up of cells, then you've got a pretty good idea that it is living, because those cells are going to meet all the other requirements. Well, what are those other requirements? Well, number 2, let's change our color here. Let's do purple. Okay, living things all read a DNA code. Hopefully you're familiar a bit with DNA. This is a picture of DNA right here, and we'll talk a lot more about this in what is probably my favorite unit, in Unit 5. But basically, DNA is a molecule inside of cells that stores a lot of information, okay? It stores information that covers basically how to grow, how to live, how to reproduce, how to look. Everything that is being done inside of an organism usually goes back to how that organism reads DNA and the code that the DNA has. You'll notice there's letters right here. T, G, C, C, T, A. Okay, so you've got all these letters in the DNA code. That's kind of like how it spells out, instructions for doing things. Okay? So DNA is a molecule, and it's inside of cells. Okay? When a living thing reproduces, so makes more of itself, okay? When it reproduces, that information is going to be copied and then passed on to the offspring. Okay, so you have a copy of your biological parent's DNA, for instance. Okay, so the information is copied and passed on. Copied and passed on. Let's change our thickness here. Okay, copied and passed on to the offspring. Here's the amazing thing, okay? Almost every species on Earth reads DNA information with the same code. So every single organism has DNA, and that DNA has basically a language within it that your cells read, and that language is the same. So it's not like humans, humans speak English and Korean and French and German, and we've got all these different languages. But for living things, the molecules read themselves in the same language. And you'll learn more about that later, okay? But for all you need to know now is if we were to discover something on Mars, it would need to have DNA if we wanted to consider it to be alive. All right, let's look at 3. Or else we could adjust our definition. Okay, so 3 is that all living things reproduce. Okay, so here I have a picture of some seeds that are on a sycamore tree, I believe, Platanus occidentalis tree here, right here. So this is the mechanism by which the tree reproduces itself. All its DNA information is being stored or its DNA information is being stored inside of this seed. That seed can then be planted, and then when it's planted, it will grow into another tree. Okay, it's reproduced itself in a sense. Okay, there's a nice little tree. Okay, so reproduction, simple definition of reproduction is you're making offspring. There's two main ways in which organisms reproduce. Okay, the one that we're most familiar with is sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is when cells from two parents unite to form a new organism's cell. Okay, so for instance, you have a sperm cell. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about this. We'll learn more about this later. You got a sperm cell from the father and an egg cell from the mother. They unite, and those are going to combine to form a new organism. Okay, a new baby. So example, we could talk about pollen from one tree, then is attaching to the flower of another tree to create seeds. And so we see trees do this. Trees, plants, flowers, okay. Humans sexually reproduce. You need cells from two human beings to form a new child, okay. Almost all animals and plants sexually reproduce in some way, okay. When we look at asexual reproduction, asexual reproduction, okay. Let's look at this this word a right here, okay. A means not or no. Just like a theist is going to be someone who believes in God, an atheist is going to be someone who does not believe in God. So sexual reproduction is two parents forming a new organism. Asexual reproduction is not sexual reproduction. That's basically one new organism produces something identical to itself. So this would be an example right here. Okay, so this is a cell, and it starts dividing. We see it dividing into two different cells, and so eventually we're going to have two cells from one. Okay, so one cell turned into two, and these are going to be cells 1 and 2 are going to be identical to each other. Okay, because they came from the same one. There was no new organism with new information coming into play here. Okay, so an example that most people know is bacteria. Okay, those are ones that will just divide like this and to create new identical copies of themselves. But you've also got things like starfish can do asexual reproduction. They don't have to, but they can. So here let's draw starfish. Okay, if you cut off one of those arms, okay, eventually over time that arm is actually going to grow into a new starfish. It's kind of cool. Okay, so there were fishermen used to like try to kill off these starfish, and so they'd pick them up and they'd cut them apart, and then they'd throw them back into the ocean. And eventually they realized there was more starfish in the ocean, and they're like, "Well, how did this happen?" And, oh, it's because they asexually divide like that. Okay, so this new guy would be an identical version to this guy, and he would just grow his arm back, and that arm would grow into a new starfish. Okay, so that would be asexual reproduction. You're reproducing, you're making copies of the original one, and there was no second starfish involved in the process. Okay, he wasn't even there. Okay, it was just this one. So starfish do that. Sometimes plants can do that. Plants often do that. So like, for instance, if you take a succulent like an aloe plant. Okay, so like if you have one of those cute little hipster plants and they grow like this. Okay, if you take one of those branches and put it in a new pot, that's going to grow a new plant. Okay, there was no second plant involved, but you're reproducing that plant. Okay, so that would be asexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction is when you have two people or two organisms forming a new one. Asexual is when you just have one. Now, part of reproduction is that we need to know and we need to have a definition for what a species is. So a species is basically a group of similar looking organisms that can breed to create offspring that also can reproduce. Basically, they can have children and grandchildren. So, for instance, if you looked at horses, okay, horses are similar looking animals. They can breed, they create offspring. Those offspring can breed, they can create more horses, okay? Dogs, even though a lot of them look very different, are all the same species. So a Boston Terrier and a Poodle and a Chihuahua are all the same species. Technically, they can breed together, they can mate, and they can have baby puppies. Those puppies can grow up and also have more kids, and so those are all one species. We'll get more into this at the end of the semester, okay? So here's an interesting thing, though, okay? We're saying that all living things reproduce, but you probably know that you should know, there's a lot of organisms that, maybe individual organisms that don't reproduce. Okay, what about the person who never has kids? Am I saying that that person who never has kids is not alive? Of course not. Okay. An individual, this is kind of one of the exceptions to all the criteria. It's kind of one of the exceptional ones. Okay, so an individual, like just a single person or a single organism, does not have to reproduce to survive. But basically, the species as a whole should be reproducing. So if I have Fred here, let's say here's Fred, okay? Fred never marries, Fred never has kids. He's still alive. He's not reproducing. But as an individual, he doesn't need to reproduce. But the human species as a whole is going to need to reproduce. In 100 years, nobody's going to care if Fred had kids. But as long as somebody in the world was having kids, we're going to continue on with the human population. So an individual does not need to reproduce, but a species does. Okay, so far we've learned living things can read DNA, they can reproduce, they have cells. So if we discovered something on Mars, we would need to have these criteria here. All right, what's something else? What makes things alive? What are some other characteristics? Well, another one is that living things grow and develop. Living things grow and develop. And those are two separate words. So basically growth is simply increasing the amount of living material. Okay, so cells divide into more cells, cells become bigger. So for instance, maybe I have a caterpillar and he's like this big one day, the next day he's this big, the next day he's this big. That's obviously growth, okay? Living things grow. They don't stay the same size. Cells become bigger, they divide, okay? Development is similar, but it looks a little bit more at the changes that happen to the form, okay? So changes that happen in form to the organism. So, for instance, here we've got a caterpillar. That caterpillar is going to wrap itself up in a chrysalis, and then eventually it's going to turn into this nice butterfly here. Okay, here we'll give the butterfly some colors. Color in the butterfly, blue and green, and that's an ugly color, and I just accidentally gave it brown, and oh well, okay. So, over time, this caterpillar develops, okay? And living things develop in different ways, okay? Human beings, even though they don't go into a chrysalis and change, you still go through puberty, have different changes in form, so they tend to develop. Development tends to happen more with multicellular organisms. So all living things definitely grow, and most living things develop in some sort of way. Unicellular organisms like bacteria, they might develop like things in like certain responses or chemically or stuff, but they don't develop in the idea that development that we see here. Okay? So if I ask you, do unicellular things develop? Yeah, kind of, but not really. You could say that. But they do grow. Grow is the main part. All right, so all living things, they're going to have to grow in order for us to consider to be alive. What else? Well, let's look at, let's change it to red here. Living things, I've got a picture of the sun here. Why is that? Living things obtain, so that means they get, they fetch, they collect, and use. So they use material and energy. Material and energy. Material and energy. I did not mean to cross that off. Sorry. I crossed out material. There we go. Material and energy. So you need to eat food. You're obtaining material. You need to use that energy from that food in order to do things. Energy is basically, it's just the ability to do work, to make things change. You need energy to change the size of your muscles so that you can run. You need energy to break down things in your digestive system, okay? So when we talk about material, okay, metabolism is important in that because we need energy to break down or build up certain things. So metabolism basically refers to any chemical reaction that builds up things. Okay, we're going to build up things, or break down materials. Okay, so you're breaking things down into smaller parts. Okay, so metabolism is all that stuff that's going on inside of your body or inside of a living thing's organism to do that. What are some examples of this? Well, maybe when your acids in your stomach break down food, or maybe they break down sugar specifically to get energy. So that's an example of breaking down. What's an example of building up? Well, we could do some, maybe making sugar. Okay, making sugar would be an example. What makes sugar? Plants. How did they do it? Well, that's through photosynthesis. So like photosynthesis could be an example of metabolism, of building up something. So you got breaking down, you got building up. Metabolism is that. Okay? So if we discover something, you say, I don't know if it's alive or not. Well, is it using energy from its surroundings? Is it breaking things down? Is it building things up? What about, is it responding to its environment? That's our next one. Okay, so number 6, living things respond. This is our important word, respond, to their outside environment. Living things respond to their outside environment. Oops, forgot to change the color. Let's go green. So when we talk about things from their outside environment, typically people are going to say living things respond to stimuli. So what is a stimuli? Okay, stimulus or stimuli. Okay, basically anything that interacts with an organism. So if you feel cold air, or warm water, or ouch, painful touch, or bright light, all those things are things that are provoking you, they're stimulating you, they're trying to get a response from you. And you, as a living organism, have the ability to respond to that. So here, for example, this is a plant. And so it's actually, the stimulus right here is gravity. Gravity is causing this plant to grow up. So this is kind of a picture of maybe it was sitting upright in a pot, and then the pot fell over. All right. Now, the plant is going to start, instead, it's not going to grow this way like it was before. It's going to grow this way because it knows gravity is going down and it wants to go the opposite of gravity. So here, the stimulus is gravity and it's going up. What are other examples of responding to stimuli? Well, maybe like if you burn your hand, you draw your hand away from the flame. So drawing your hand, so taking it back, okay, drawing your hand from a flame. Okay, we got a fire here. Ouch, don't burn yourself, okay? Or maybe maybe you have like a fish swims towards the light. So it knows there's light there. So basically, the purpose of this is a living thing is not inside of a bubble and can't respond to its outside environment. Okay, that's not what a living thing is. A living thing knows what's outside of it and then responds to it and acts differently because it sees that. So a rock, for instance, can't really actively and mindfully respond to its outside environment in the way that a living thing could. All right. So what are our last two things? What color do we want? Oh, let's do let's do galaxy here. Okay, living things maintain a word that we call homeostasis. Homeostasis. Okay. Stasis kind of means this way of being or staying. Okay, homeo means same, so same way of staying. So if we could define homeostasis, we could say it's basically relatively stable internal conditions that organisms maintain. Whoa, those are big words. All right. Basically, we could say just the right conditions. That's another way that we could define homeostasis. It's where you want to be. It's just the right way. So I always think of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So if you're familiar with this story, there's a little girl, and here let's have her come here. She's got a dress that's blue, maybe. I'm pretty sure she has like golden yellow hair, if I remember correctly. All right, so here's Goldilocks. Oh yeah, because she has golden locks. Okay, and she enters in this house with these bears, and these bears have left this soup on the table. Okay, so in one, there's like a baby bowl. Okay, there's the mother bowl, and then there's the papa bowl, which is huge, and he's eating out of like a, crazy big thing and probably using a shovel as a spoon. And so Goldilocks, she eats out of the baby bear's bowl, and she's like, this is too small. And then she eats out of Papa Bear's bowl, and she's like, this is too big. And then, mother bowl is just right. And then, baby's bowl is too hot, too warm. It's not good. Papa bowl's is too cold. It's too cold. This is just the right temperature. Pretty sure there were chairs as well. So there was like just the right size of chair. When she sat in baby chair, then she fell over and broke the chair, and then she couldn't even fit in Papa Bear's chair. Okay, so homeostasis is this section right here. Just the right temperature, just the right size, just the right conditions for her to be able to enjoy a nice meal. Okay, same thing happens with our bodies and with living things. So you want to remain a certain temperature. If you are too cold, that's really bad. You need to wear a blanket. You need to put something on, okay? If you're too hot, you probably have a fever. Maybe you have corona, okay? And then people freak out, and then you have to be in quarantine, okay? You want to keep a particular temperature, and you want to maintain that. So your body does a lot of work to make sure that you keep the same temperature. So an example of keeping homeostasis. So homeostasis isn't the action. Homeostasis is the noun. It's what you want. and then you got to keep it and you got to maintain it. Okay, so an example of maintaining homeostasis, when it's cold outside, what do? What does your body do? Well, you're probably shivering, right? Your teeth are chattering and you're like, right? You're shivering. Why do you shiver? Well, all that movement of your muscles creates warmth. And that warmth is going to keep you warm. And so it keeps your temperature at the right temperature. You shiver your muscles to stay warm. Okay? So that's a way that your body maintains homeostasis. A plant might keep homeostasis. Maybe it's too dry, and so it sucks up more water so that it keeps its internal conditions right. Okay, so when we think about living things respond to their outside environment, okay, if here's our cell, okay, then here's all the outside things that it's got to respond to. Okay, bright light, okay, that kind of stuff. In homeostasis, here, let's do the rainbow again. Homeostasis is more like keeping those internal things correct. So the internal temperature's got to stay right. Internal water, internal salt, okay, all that stuff has got to stay correct. So that's maintaining homeostasis. Keeping it the way that is good. All right, our last characteristic of life is evolution and evolving. So as a group, all living things evolve and change over time. Now, when I say the word evolve, many of you have come from different backgrounds where you might have a different reaction to the word evolution. When I'm saying evolve, I'm not necessarily talking about things changing over billions of years and that kind of stuff, okay? I'm simply saying a group of organisms changing over time. So, for instance, maybe over 100 years, we went from having a lot of butterflies with orange spots to having a lot of butterflies with blue areas. Okay? We're not talking about like monkeys evolving into humans or cells or fish evolving into dinosaurs or something like that. Okay, we're talking about just small changes over time like this. And all living things kind of adapt to their environments and change over time. And this happens with a population. Okay, so as a group, this is very specific. So this is important because some people think, oh, if just one organism changes over its time, that's evolution. Like, oh, I used to have blonde hair and now I have brown hair. I'm evolving. No, you're not evolving. That's not true. Okay, that's not what that is. You are just a single person. Over time, things might change. So, for instance, thousands and thousands of years ago, there were no humans with blue eyes. Then a mutation happened. Now there's a lot of people with blue eyes. So it's not about one person changing. It's about the whole human population changing from, there was always people with, let's do brown here. All right, there were always people with brown eyes. And then over time, you had a lot of people with brown eyes still, but now there's a couple people with blue eyes. All right, the population is changing over time. The group is changing over time. What's another example? Oh, let's think about snails, okay? So we could say a population of mostly brown snails over time becomes mostly white snails. So if 100 years ago we had mostly brown snails, now today we have a lot of white snails. Okay, that's a population changing over time because maybe being white allows you to camouflage with the white rocks or something like that. Okay, so it's beneficial. So As a group, all living things evolve. Okay, they are made up of one or more cells. They read a DNA code. They reproduce. They grow. They develop. They use material and energy. They respond to their outside environment. They keep things the way they need to be with homeostasis on the inside, and they change over time. Here's how you're going to remember, and you do need to know this list. I may ask you to write it. Okay, here's how you can remember this acronym. Cheer Dr. G. Woo! Let's go, Dr. G. Cheer Dr. G. All right? These letters represent your words. So, for instance, C, what could that stand for? Cells. H represents homeostasis. Okay? E, well, we had one on energy, right? There's another E word. That would be evolve. What's an R word? An R word that we learned about was reproduce. All living things reproduce. Okay, here's a D. What word do we have that starts with D? DNA. All living things have DNA. Okay, R. What's another R word? Respond. They respond to their outside environment. Then we have G. What could G stand for? Well, which one do we not have yet? Grow. All living things grow. So, if I ask you, what makes something alive? You can say, well, anything that has cells, they keep homeostasis, they use energy, they change over time, they reproduce to create more of themselves, they have DNA inside of them, they respond to their environment, and they grow. That makes up a living thing, and that's your way to remember that. Okay? Wow. All right, so we've got one last part to this page. If you need to pause and take a break, you can. But I'm just going to finish the last part of this video going over these last parts of our notes. So, throughout this throughout the year in this class, we're going to be talking about something called intelligent design. So basically, in everyday lives, we encounter things that people invented or designed. Okay, so for instance, a phone, it's a really cool invention. Smartphones, just crazy the complexity and design that goes into those. So just by looking at something, we can often tell if it was designed or not. So there's a difference between my phone and a rock. So sometimes we also see these themes of design in biology as well. So there's a certain theory called the theory of intelligent design. And basically that tries to explain everything that we see in biology as being a result of an intelligent designer. So basically, if we can figure out what makes things apparent or obvious that they were designed, we can look at biology and think, can we tell if somebody created this? You can probably already see where I'm going with this, okay? As someone who believes that God created life, we should be able to see signs that he created things, right? Did everything evolve by complete random chance, or was there a God who actually designed all the living things that we're going to be studying? If God designed things, then we should be able to see certain signs of that, just like we see certain signs of intelligent design in our inventions. So this kind of goes back to your activity from yesterday, your exploration activity, where if you found something on Mars, would you be able to tell if an intelligent life form created it? So here we're going to look at, if you found something, could you tell if somebody, or an intelligent designer, like an engineer or God, did he create it? Okay, so an intelligent designer, these people we create and plan with an end goal in mind. What would be an example of that? Well, for instance, if you're going to build a bridge, you better know where the other side of the bridge is going to come land on. Or if you're assembling a car, you know what it's going to look like. All right, so here we got a car here. You've got to have the final plan in place first. All right, you create a blueprint, you create an outline like this, you know what's going into the design. So you always create and plan with an end goal in mind. So in biology, if God created things, we should be able to see things that have goals, things that have like steps and processes that always have a plan. Another thing intelligent designers do is they have the ability to send meaningful information. I can send a message to you. Right now I'm sending a message to you because I am writing with letters and words. I created and I designed this worksheet, and I'm giving information to you by writing these out. So in life, if there is an intelligent designer, and if there's a God who created life, we should be able to see information in life. So we'll kind of draw back on these throughout the year. For example, a CD has information. But note, that CD is useless if you don't have a CD player. So you always need something to interpret it. Alright? I'm writing in English right now. If you do not know English, you will not get anything that I'm trying to say. So you both need, I need to be able to send meaningful information in a way that you can understand, in a way that I can write. Life does the same thing. Life has a lot of information that it relays to, that it has, and it reads and it interprets. Alright, intelligent designers, another really cool thing that we can do is we can use the same design multiple times. Okay, so for instance, if we look down here, and these are things that humans designed. We intelligently designed a bicycle and car. What are some things that are used multiple times? Things we reused. Well, wheels. Alright. Even though these are different inventions, human beings as intelligent designers know, hey, if I have already invented the wheel, I can just use it again. Alright, here's another wheel. Okay, so wheels might be important. Maybe handles. So here's a handle. Sorry, there's a handle. There's a handle. So we've reused handles there. Okay, pedals. You know there's going to be a pedal at the bottom here where your foot can go. Here, maybe in a slightly different purpose, but similar. Okay, so intelligent designers use the same design multiple times. We also see the same thing in biology. Okay, things might look a little bit different, but we see, for instance, here's a wing. Here's a wing. They're different kinds of wings, but they're still wings. We see legs here. Okay, so we see the same design happening multiple times. So a person coming from an evolutionary perspective might say these two things evolved from a similar creature. Actually, they wouldn't say that because these are two totally different wings. Okay, but we would just say, as a Christian, what I would say is God knows wings are a functional piece of structure. He can just reuse it. So he can use it in birds, he can use it in grasshoppers and butterflies, and it might look a little bit differently, but he can still use it over and over again. Okay, even in us, okay, for instance, we would have in our body a rib cage. So do birds. Birds also have a rib cage. Alright? Different things like that. Or an eyeball. Okay? So different designs, same design can be reused multiple times. So wheels, for instance, what all do we use wheels in? Cars, bicycles, airplanes have wheels to land, scooters, carts, wheelbarrows, all sorts of things. If we're intelligent enough, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can reuse it multiple times. Last thing, signs of an intelligence, signs that somebody created something, we can find from if they create a structure that has function and purpose. So these are huge words in biology that people talk a lot about. Create a structure that has structure, that's redundant. I mistyped that. Here, let's write this again. Structure that has function and purpose. Ooh. So for instance, here I've got a mug. That handle right there has a structure that is round, and that structure allows me to carry out its function of holding on to the mug. So a structure is shaped a certain way so that it can do a certain thing. Okay, so shape allows it to do things. So if a wheel were shaped like a square, that would be bad. The structure would not allow it to carry out its function. But because it's a circle, its structure allows it to carry out its function. We see the same thing in biology. The structure of the bones in a bird, for instance, if we look at a cross-section of a bone, it's really like airy and has a lot of holes in it. It's very light. The reason for that is so that it can fly. So the structure of the bone allows it to fly. Okay, there's a certain function attached to the structure. The way that these grasshopper legs are shaped allow it to jump. The structure of the leg gives it the function to jump. So if you went to Mars and you found some object and it looked like there was information on it, you would immediately know that that thing came from an intelligent alien species maybe, okay? Or if you saw that there was a certain pattern or design that was reused in multiple different artifacts that you found, or everything seemed to have a purpose in a particular structure, okay, or there was an end goal, it looked like, you would use those as signs of an intelligent civilization. When we look at living things, we see these different aspects as well. Inside of the cells of these animals, we see DNA, okay, and DNA contains information. Information has to come from an intelligence. So that to me is a great evidence for when we study biology, we're studying the work of an engineer. We're studying living things that were designed by somebody. And I'd like to suggest that that somebody was God. Okay, so that concludes our Notes 1.1. Now you've got a fine list of things that are help us to know what life is and help us to start thinking about something that we'll be thinking about through the whole year. That is how we can know that life was designed by someone and how we can start to put together those pieces. This is Notes 1.1. Later, I will be giving you Homework 1.1. That'll act as a way to help you practice what you've learned. And eventually I'll give you Quiz 1.1, where you will have to argue for whether something is alive or not. And you'll also need to tell me these 8 things. So these 8 things right here, you will want to memorize as things that make something alive. As always, if you have questions, email me or comment on this post. If you have a question about content Like, hey, you said this about homeostasis, but I'm confused. What about this? Okay? Comment on the post so that other students can see it and I can answer your question so that they can all see your answer. Okay? Hope you have a great rest of your day.